Good morning. Happy Monday. Welcome to NewsWire on SportsGrid. Craig Mish back with you here, recapping the weekend, looking ahead, of course, to the day of action in college basketball, the NBA, the NHL, the latest news, notes, information, of course, sports wagering, business, and information as well. On our program today, Mike Mazzio will be with us from Legal Sports Sports, so stay tuned. A little bit later in the program, we'll talk about the latest on sports betting in California. We will also head to the land of the desert and out in Arizona. And Jalen Thompson from the Kansas City Star is going to join us. We'll talk about the latest in Royals camp. Also in the NBA, Gilbert McGregor is our guest on the program as well. That's how we get the show started here on this Monday. Lots of great guests, lots of information to provide to you here on the show, and hopefully a little entertainment as well. But unfortunately, no entertainment for the Duke Blue Devils this morning. They got to be reeling. They lost to Wake Forest yesterday and got upset. 83-79 was the final, and unfortunately in this game as well, Kyle Filipowski injured his leg as students ran on the floor as the game ended. 83-79. Again, a huge upset for the Demon Deacons, but even more upset is basically there was still like a .1 on the clock, and fans went on the court. Now, no word in terms of Filipowski, how long he'll potentially be out. I am sure this is going to be a very big story today. We'll follow it for you here, of course, on SportsGrid, no question. But the other part of this is that does this become the beginning of the end for fans storming the court, fans storming the field? Once you have players starting to get injured in these situations, usually that's when it ends. And John Shire, of course, the head coach of Duke, says essentially this is where it has to stop.
Disappointed we lost, but look, for me, I'm more concerned about the well-being of our guys. You know, Flip sprains his ankle. When are we going to ban court storming? Like, when are we going to ban that? Like, how many times does a player have to get into something where they get punched or they get pushed or they get taunted right in their face? And it's a dangerous thing. And I don't want that to take away from the game that Wake played. Because Wake played a big-time game. Salas was as good as could be today. And hats off to them. But you look around the country, and Caitlin Clark, something happens. And now Flip, I don't know what his status is going to be. He sprains his ankle. And it's one thing, like when I played, at least it was 10 seconds in the court, you would storm the court. Now it's the buzzer doesn't even go off, and they're running on the floor. And this has happened to us a bunch this year. It's part of it. I don't want this to take away at all from Wake. They earned it. They deserve the win. Steve is a hell of a coach. I respect the heck out of him and his team. They're really good. And if this is an example that they need to be in the tournament, what are we even talking about? So I'll answer any questions, but for me, that's hats off to them. We need to be better. We need to learn from this. But that needs to stop.
Well said, and we'll see if it does. Needless to say, college basketball has to be extremely careful because, again, March Madness is coming up fast and furious, less than a month from now. Okay, if you want to sell new jerseys and you want fans to buy your gear, you do a rebrand, and it seems as though that's what the LA Clippers are doing, as it was announced this morning. A new $2 billion arena is coming for the Clippers. New uniforms, new colors, and yeah, I mean, maybe some new players as well. You never know with this stuff. Funny, James Harden is one of the the pictures here, and naturally, maybe James Harden will even be on the Clippers. We'll even know. May ask for a trade at some point. Clippers are having a good year, though, so good news for them. Okay, full slate of spring training games, less than 2 hours from now. I had a chance to go to some this weekend, a lot of fun there. Also fun right now to be a fan of the Chicago Cubs. You got Cody Bellinger back. It was announced this weekend. 3 years, $80 million, and one of Scott Boras' clients finally off the board in a rebound season, although he does have an opt-out after this year. This could essentially be another one-year deal if Cody Bellinger has a big year. Also, Garrett Cooper, 17 home runs last year for the Marlins and Padres. He signs yesterday. You may have seen me break this news last night on social media with the Chicago Cubs. It is an NRI with a spring training invite. And for those of you who are curious, I don't think I even reported this online, about $2 million is the potential salary with player bonuses if Cooper makes the team at the end of March. Jen Powell becomes the first umpire that is a woman to umpire a spring training game since 2007. It happened at the ballpark of the Palm Beaches over the weekend in case you missed it, so congratulations to her. Also behind the plate for the Nats Marlins on Sunday, if in case you missed that, former Hofstra softball player. MLBPA is saying that cutting the pitch clock happening is too soon. Baseball wants to cut it down to 2. By 2 seconds, the players say it's too much. Again, a battle going back and forth. But with these new rules, let's also remember the most important part of this is that the commissioner of Major League Baseball has the right to implement changes as he sees fit. Keep that in mind. Okay, an injunction also we found out over the weekend in this NIL case that has been going on. The ruling in a Tennessee court now allows athletes to renegotiate their NIL deals during their recruiting process and while they're in the transfer portal. Again, this is not final, but worth noting that the battle of the NILs and colleges just continue. Ohio gaming regulators have made it official. They're banning NCAA prop betting. So those of you who live in Ohio for the upcoming NCAA tournament, no props on those players in the tournament coming up next month. Also, Eric Bieniemy back to college football. He's set to become the UCLA offensive coordinator, former, of course, coordinator with the Chiefs last year with the Washington Commanders, now heads back to UCLA. And also, Caitlin Clark, 16th career triple-double, and good news for that team. They needed a win. They won 101-85 yesterday over Illinois. In the Heat Pelicans fight, we've got suspensions. I'm sure you saw this on social media all over the place. Crazy fighting, back and forth, punches, everything. Friday in New Orleans, the Heat won the game. But Jimmy Butler is among those who received 1-game suspensions. And by the way, the team's going to meet later in the month of March on the 22nd. Bad news for the Atlanta Hawks. 4 weeks without Trae Young. My goodness, he tore his ligament in his left pinky, hurt it on Friday night. Now, the Atlanta Hawks, again, need this player, probably the most important player, maybe on any team in the NBA, to have Trae Young when he's right and he's good. The Hawks are good, and when not, well, you know the deal. The Golden State Warriors are paying up for Steve Kerr $35 million over 2 years. It is the highest paid coach and the most money given out to a coach in NBA history. 4 championships with the Warriors. Congrats to Steve Kerr. And the Celtics are still red hot. They won their 8th straight game on Saturday night. They beat the Knicks at the Garden by a final of 116-102. Over in hockey, the win streak is finally over for the Blue Shirts. The New York Rangers, they tied a win streak of 10 in a row that was finally snapped. It's over. Patrick Kane scores an overtime winner over the Blackhawks. Red Wings win 3-2. Daniel Suarez wins the Ambetter Health 400 on the NASCAR circuit. And Lionel Messi scores in the 92nd minute over an MLS to get a draw with the LA Galaxy. The final in that match was 1-1. That's the latest here on this Monday. Hopefully we got it all in. If not, we got more to get to because we're going to talk some NBA. In fact, with Trae Young out for the Atlanta Hawks, what does this mean potentially? Because again, the most important part of their season is about to come up in March and April. Gilbert McGregor is going to weigh on that coming up next. And also this big fight between the Heat and the Pelicans. Did the NBA do the right thing, suspending 5 players? We'll tell you next.
Point guard, a great big that can block shots, a team that can play defense, and seniors that can put the ball in the hole. That's who you bet on. You don't bet on freshmen. You don't bet on teams that don't play defense. There you go.
I mean, you got to run the guy over to call a foul in a tie game in that kind of a spot. That was a bad job by those refs.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
If Tibbs can find a way to get the Knicks rolling again as everybody comes back, folks, they are going to shoot up the Eastern Conference standings. There are 33 wins. I think the Knicks have a chance to maybe, folks, ready? You think I'm crazy? They could get all the way to 2. It is not out of the question.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
Like the Minnesota Wild were down by 2 goals today. They were down by 3 goals, actually, today at one point. And they came back and won. Like teams like, the Edmonton Oilers and the Coyote game went back and forth. The NHL really, you could argue, really is the best sport for in-game betting, where you can pull the trigger on both teams.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. Let's get to the very latest in the NBA. We're joined by Gilbert McGregor of Sporting News. We'll go over everything happening in the slate tonight, see if we can give out some good information, maybe some positions on the games. Gilbert, great to have you back here over the weekend. Thanks again for coming on.
Oh, great to be back, Craig.
All right, so let's get started with how valuable Trae Young is to the Atlanta Hawks. I think I want to start there because it's rare in this day and age of the NBA to, miss one player and have the wheels fall off. We saw that with Memphis with Ja Morant, and you probably could make the case with several other players in the league. Joel Embiid, probably a good example of that in Philadelphia too. I maintain, though, that not having Trae Young on Atlanta is right up there with the rest of them. He's that talented. He's that good. He's always the guy that makes it go. Now, he's going to be out approximately 4 weeks. The danger zone right now is here, Gilbert, because, again, 4 weeks from now, how will the Hawks, what will their record be? What will they look like? And can they survive this run without him?
This is such an interesting spot that the Hawks now find themselves in. Trae Young's going to be reevaluated in 4 weeks. They're kind of hanging on to one of those final play-in tournament positions in the Eastern Conference. And there are teams like the Nets and the Bulls and the Raptors who are right in that same vicinity, who now they're looking and saying, well, if the Hawks are without a player like Trae Young, and we talk about how important he is, averaging over 26 points and just under 11 assists per game this season, maybe they're a little susceptible to falling back. It's going to put a lot on DeJounte Murray, a lot on Bogdan Bogdanovic, who are two guards who are going to need to do more playmaking and do more scoring for the Hawks to kind of keep their heads above water in the absence of Trae Young. There's another part of it that's really interesting, and that's the fact that Trae Young has been linked to other teams. They think that his time in Atlanta could be coming to an end soon. So if the Hawks are able to survive without him and maybe even thrive without him, then you maybe speculate that this offseason they could look to part ways. And he's been linked to the Spurs and the Lakers. So there's going to be a lot going on depending on how this Hawks team is able to perform without Trae Young, if they can stay in that postseason picture, and then what happens when he's back in the lineup and how they look and what that means for the bigger picture when the offseason comes around.
Yeah, it feels like the Hawks are sort of always in this range of that play-in game, too. But this is the first time they're not going to have Trae Young for this, too. So it should be fascinating to see. Okay, the Heat and Pelicans, they battle it out on the court, and then they literally battle it out. First, there's this little skirmish where Gilbert, the guys are arguing, they're fighting, Jimmy Butler's yelling, and then it stops for a second. And then all of a sudden it starts up, and it goes into the bench, and then it gets a little more physical. And the NBA basically has dropped the hammer here, saying, hey, again, we got to remind you players, if you come off the bench and you get involved in a scuffle, you're not going to play. And I suppose the bigger question, Gilbert, is from the betting perspective here, is how many players at once are going to be out for both teams this week?
It's interesting, you talk about these altercations that happen in games, and the NBA does like to make an example, Craig. And I think that's important, especially looking at the fact that Jimmy Butler was disciplined. Like, no name is too big to be disciplined for situations like this. I think you talk about this Pelicans team and this Heat team. These are two teams who have had ups and downs this season, and they probably feel a little disrespected. And sometimes that anger and that tension kind of comes out against a team that you don't necessarily like, or you don't actually face that often, but these two teams do play again in a few weeks down in South Beach. But thinking about Jimmy Butler missing one game, the Heat are obviously much worse off without him, but they're grateful that it's only one game. And the two guys who did get 3-game suspensions are further down the bench and not necessarily rotation guys. So I think that both teams are pretty fortunate as far as that goes, but still your depth is impacted. You start looking at teams maybe getting a little bit tired quicker when they're down a couple guys. I think that will apply to the Heat when they're without, these 3 guys who will be missing a game at the same time. So it's interesting to see what happens, what comes of this. But an example is made. They don't want people fight. They don't want people leaving that bench area. And we saw like kind of 3 different altercations unfold at once down in New Orleans.
Yeah, and we're going to preview that game between the Heat and the Kings. It's a late night game, so we'll do it last. Let's start off with the game tonight between Toronto and Indiana. The Pacers 6.5-point favorites. They are at home. And of course, whenever Indiana plays, the total is going to be super high. It is again tonight, 246 in an NBA game. This is not the All-Star game. It's a regular season game with a total of 246. Gilbert, the Raptors, I don't know what we thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season. I think it's fair to say they've been disappointing. They're 15 games under 500. They're not going to make the playoffs. They're shooting for next year. But this is a team, again, we've seen over the course of a week or two that they pull off these like very strange upsets at times. Can they do that again tonight in Indiana?
I think one thing the Raptors have done this year is they've set their mind and they've set an identity, right? They've gotten rid of some of the guys who were there and trading OG Anunoby and trading Pascal Siakam, who's now with the Pacers, and now they're focused on the future. And in doing so, I think that's helped them kind of understand what they want to do on a night-to-night basis. They do have a rest advantage. The Pacers played last night and actually put forth a pretty good defensive effort against the Mavericks. The Pacers are playing good basketball, but as you mentioned, the Raptors have played a little bit better. They actually just took this Pacers team down to the wire a few weeks ago. They've won 2 games in a row since then. So I'm actually expecting a pretty close game just because the way these two teams match up, the fact that the Pacers played a game last night, and the Raptors are starting to figure out their identity a little bit more now that their roster's a little bit more straightforward. So it should be an entertaining game in Indiana. The storyline's there, and the talent's definitely there.
All right, now let's get to the game that has the biggest spread, which is the Knicks and Pistons. The Knicks are 11-point favorites tonight with a total of 226 at the Garden. And look, I know, some people are watching the NBA closely, some are not. 8-48 Detroit is on the season. I guess the bigger look, Knicks are going to win tonight, okay? The bigger question, I guess, as we sort of get into this topic here, Gilbert, a little bit, are the Pistons going to win those 13 games that they need to avoid the infamy here? You think they're going to get there?
It's tough. Sometimes when we see teams like this come out of the gates, to say it's a struggle would be an understatement. They find something towards the end of the year. And I know we talked about this Pistons team when they were in the midst of that really terrible, historic losing streak that they had. I think it got to 28 or 29 games earlier in the year. They have talent on the roster. They have a good head coach leading the way. So I could see them down the stretch of the season, maybe stringing together a handful of wins to avoid more infamy, since they already own the longest losing streak in NBA history. But it'll be interesting to see. Specific to tonight, I think this Knicks team actually has been pretty frustrated in losing a couple games lately. They've been really injured and they're still undermanned, but I do think that some of that frustration will come out against a lesser opponent. And if the Pistons want to get back on the right side of things, it won't be tonight in New York because they're facing a pretty angry Knicks team.
Yeah, 8-48. I mean, this takes me back to the expansion years. It's sort of incredible. Okay, so the Heat, generally speaking, when Jimmy Butler doesn't play, they don't play particularly well, but they can still cover a spread. I mean, let's be honest. That's why the spread is 7.5 tonight at Sacramento. Look, the Kings should be, this much of a favorite. I would say that's fair. 7.5 point favorites, 225. But Miami does tend, to piece things together when Jimmy doesn't play. Can they keep it close enough tonight, Gilbert, or maybe pull an upset off tonight out in California?
I think the Heat are starting to round into form. This is the time of the year where the Heat thrive regardless of who is on the floor, and we learned that about this team last year. I certainly think that tonight will be one of those examples. The Kings also played a pretty big game last night in LA, so they're on the second end of a back-to-back. Bam Adebayo matches up well with Domantas Sabonis, and I think that could be something that the Heat could use in their advantage. So as far as keeping the game close, I certainly think the Heat have enough to do so. They're well coached, next man up mentality, and they've been getting some good contributions from guys across the board. So I think the Heat will build on their momentum and at least keep things close out in Sacramento tonight.
All right, take the points, says Gilbert on the show today. Hey, Gilbert, have a great rest of your week. Thanks again for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, Gilbert McGregor with us. Time for us to take a quick break. When we come back, we head out to spring training in the Cactus League, get a preview of what the Kansas City Royals will look like this season as Jalen Thompson from the KC Star joins us next.
A great big that can block shots, a team that can play defense, and seniors that can put the ball in the hole. That's who you bet on. You don't bet on freshmen. You don't bet on teams that don't play defense. There you go.
I mean, you got to run the guy over to call a foul in a tie game in that kind of a spot. That was a bad job by those refs.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
And Tibbs can find a way to get the Knicks rolling again as everybody comes back, folks. They are going to shoot up the Eastern Conference standings. They're at 33 wins. I think the Knicks have a chance to maybe, folks, ready? You think I'm crazy? They could get all the way to 2. It is not out of the question.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
Like the Minnesota Wild were down by 2 goals today. They were down by 3 goals, actually, today at one point. And they came back and won. Like teams like, the Edmonton Oilers and the Coyote game went back and forth. The NHL really, you could argue, really is the best sport for in-game betting, where you can pull the trigger on both teams.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire. If you subscribe to the Kansas City Star and follow them all season long, you'll be following Jalen Thompson as he is on the Royals beat once again this season. He joins us now here on NewsWire. We'll get a little preview as to how things have gone thus far in Surprise, Arizona for the Royals, who have actually been one of the teams that's been talked a lot this offseason. Jalen, great to have you here on the show for the first time on NewsWire. Thanks for taking some time to join us.
Thanks, Craig. I'm super excited to be here. I know this has been a long time coming, so I'm excited to see and talk about the Royals today.
Yeah, and you do a great job covering them and keeping everybody informed. And generally speaking, Jalen, the Royals haven't been that team over the last, 5-10 years that have really done a lot in the offseason. But all of a sudden, they went on a little bit of a big spending spree. They extend Bobby Witt Jr., who, of course, is a superstar and now going to be with the club, it looks like, for the remainder of his career. $288 million over 11 years. Got some opt-outs, too, down the line. But naturally, Jalen, this is a special, talented player. And he comes to spring training. You notice any differences with Bobby Witt Jr. since he showed up?
I think that he continues to take on that leadership role that the team wanted him to do. And, you know, they have Salvador Perez, who's the team captain. And I think that with Bobby working alongside him, he's like taking the next steps towards, you know, being the face of the franchise. And I think it was a good deal for both sides, because for Bobby, he got a lot of flexibility in the deal later on in his career, depending on what he wants to do. And for the Royals, they locked up their best player for the long term, and that can help them as they continue to get better and try to win the American League division.
And the division, you know, let's be honest. I mean, the Twins are the class of the division, but would anybody be shocked to see the Royals make a jump this year? I don't think so. I mean, let's take a look at some of the players they added, and then we'll talk about some losses. But let's start first with the additions for the Royals this past offseason. Adam Frazier, well-traveled player who can play a little infield if you need him, and he's versatile. Hunter Renfroe, I think we know exactly what his numbers are going to be at the end of the year. 20-something home runs, going to play good right field. Waka, Lugo, Will Smith, Garrett Hampson, and these are major league players, Jalen. I mean, they've added players to play on the major league roster, and so this is a great sign, I think, for fans there. And again, wins and losses notwithstanding, it definitely shows a lot of effort that the Royals are taking this season more seriously.
Definitely, and I think the one thing that I really liked hearing from a lot of the guys was they said last year was a learning year. You know, they had a lot of young players that were trying to establish themselves in the big leagues. This year, they decided to go out and they got a lot of key veterans. And the one thing that the organization wanted to hammer down was they wanted guys that knew how to win. So if you look at that list, all of those guys have playoff experience, and that's what the Royals want to get to this year. I think bringing in a Seth Lugo and Michael Waka is key, because you're allowing some guys that pitched in big situations last year to kind of find their own rhythm, their own role now. The roles can be more defined, because you're going to have Cole Reagan, you're going to have Seth Lugo, you're going to have Michael Waka be that top three. Now a guy like Brady Singer, who was 1 or 2 last year, moves down to the 4th spot in the rotation. That might help benefit him, learning from those guys as well and taking the pressure off of him. Same with some of those guys in the bullpen. You have defined roles. Maybe a Will Smith takes on that closer role. You have setup men now that can help carry along a young guy like James McArthur. So these are moves that help just give the team more depth, and I think it can help them in the long run.
Yeah, and I do want to add to that, because I think, Jalen, the one thing that is really interesting about the Royals is they recognized this offseason, at least from my perspective, you could tell me, is that they've had no issue sort of finding offensive replacements and finding offensive players to develop and bring up. But for some reason, and they've had all these very high picks, Jalen, but they haven't been able to draft and develop the pitching. So do you think that they accomplished what they're looking for here with Lugo and Waka? And I know Reagan's you mentioned too. I know you're big fans of him going into the season as well. Is that enough, you think?
Yeah, I think so. For the team, their biggest thing was they wanted to throw first pitch strikes. They wanted to attack the strike zone. And this year they have a new theme called Rain the Zone, which means being able to command the strike zone more, be more efficient with your pitch selection and where you want the baseball to go. And I think with the addition of Lugo, the addition of Waka, that helps a lot of the pitching staff, because now those guys know how to throw strikes. Those guys make opposing teams put the ball in play, and that relies on the defense, and it keeps the game at a better flow. And also, you mentioned the young prospects and not drafting well. I think for the Royals, now that you have these veterans that are in here, you can take some of those younger guys that you might have had to call up earlier in their career. They can be in a AAA. They can be getting those starts and those experiences that they needed. And also, you can't forget that the Royals also have more depth with their pitching staff with the inclusion of those guys, because now you look at someone like a Daniel Lynch DeFord, who started a lot of games last year. He's another option that can be in that pitching rotation. You're going to have Chris Bubich coming back off of Tommy John surgery. He should be back around the middle of the year. So these are some players and guys. Alec Marsh is another one who had a good rookie season. So they have options now, and that's always good if you're a major league team.
Yeah, you have to have, people just look at the 5-man rotation. It's never that way at the end of the season.
Never
It's
that.
the 6, the 7,
Yeah.
the 8, the 10, 12. For the Royals, it's been like a dozen every year. So hopefully this is a different year for them. Okay, so when you want a new stadium, Jalen, this is what you do. You extend Bobby Witt. You sign a bunch of players. You're like, hey, come out to the park. Let's win a little bit. Hard to pitch a new stadium and new facility without doing a little bit of winning and a little bit of trying. So it seems like that is correlated with this attempt to get a new stadium. And I know Kauffman Stadium is beautiful, but they do need an upgrade. So let's get into that here, Jalen. How realistic is it with this new ballpark? And what are you hearing as far as the location of it, the ownership involved, how much they want to put into this? And obviously, if you're going to upgrade this thing, it's going to cost a great amount of money to do.
Yeah. So the stadium is a big thing, big topic around Kansas City at this point. They have decided where they want to potentially put the new stadium. They want to put it in the downtown area, and they have come up with renderings and things of that nature showing like where it's going to go, building an entertainment district, and they committed to spending over $1 billion financially to help get this done with private investments. But they still need the public support, because the overall cost of the project is going to be around $2 billion. So there's going to be an election on April 2nd in Kansas City, Jackson County, where the stadium is going to be, and it's going to rely on whether they want to extend this 3/8 sales tax that will help pay for renovations to Arrowhead Stadium where the Kansas City Chiefs play, and also kind of help fund this new stadium that the Royals are trying to build. So it's going to be key on the public to decide whether they want to spend this money or not. And that's going to be part of that April 2nd vote that's going to happen.
Yeah, and Jalen, what do you get the sense? You get the sense that the public is behind this? I know the public is going to get behind the Chiefs. Really nice to slide them in there, right? Good idea, right?
Yeah. I think for Royals fans, it's really going to come down to whether they want to support this or not, and what the team is going to do should they get this new stadium. What's it going to look like in the next 5 years? Is the team going to be competitive? Is it worth spending their money that fans make and citizens in Jackson County make to have this stadium down there? So it's 50-50, depending on some fans they want it, some fans they don't want it. But I think for the Royals' perspective, they just got to make sure that they continue to win games, because if they can win games, then that can drive up the interest of the fans that are in Jackson County and say, yeah, we'll put the stadium there. So it's gonna be key for sure.
Okay, so we're only a couple of weeks into spring training. I'm going to put you on the spot here before you go. Now, you can't answer Bobby Witt Jr. It's not a fair answer here on the show. And Salvador Perez has been around for 75 years, so you can't use him either. So, Jalen, give me a player on the Royals that you think maybe at the end of the season, that we're not talking about as much now, that could be in line for a great season, maybe a breakout season, a player you've seen since camp opened a couple of weeks ago, that has a chance to really catch people's eye by the end of the baseball season?
Oh, that's a tough question. Well, I'm going to go with James McArthur, because I think what he showed last season is going to be real. I think that he really showed he can be a guy that can pitch in the back end of that bullpen. And I think that he's someone that if it all breaks right, he could be potentially in that closer mix if they decide to go that way. I know they're going to try to get Will Smith to hit the first crack at that. But if James McArthur is the guy, I think someone that you might want to watch out for, because that last few weeks, he didn't give up a run over his last 16 innings. So I think it's very key to see what he's going to do moving forward.
All right. Well, Jalen, I think you threw out a name that most people have no idea who that is. That's a really good sign.
Yeah.
You're giving us a deep sleeper here on the show. Hey,
Yeah.
Jalen, thanks again for making some time for us here this morning. I know for you on NewsWire, and appreciate all your work. Great job, and very, very good information for us as well. And have a great rest of your spring. I'm sure we'll talk again during the season.
Thank you so much, Craig. I appreciate it, and I'm excited, and thank you again.
All right, Jalen Thompson with us. Follow all of his work on social media and also read him over in the Kansas City Star covering the Royals. Okay, we got to take a quick time out here on the show. Coming up next, we've got Mike Mazzio from Legal Sports Report, the very latest on sports betting in California. We have an update there. And if you're betting on the NCAA tournament in Ohio and you log on to FanDuel, DraftKings, or one of these betting sites and you're looking for player props, you're not going to find them. Mike Mazzio will tell us why. Next.
Point guard, a great big that can block shots, a team that can play defense, and seniors that can put the ball in the hole. That's who you bet on. You don't bet on freshmen. You don't bet on teams that don't play defense. There you go.
I mean, you got to run the guy over to call a foul in a tie game in that kind of a spot. That was a bad job by those refs.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
If Tibbs can find a way to get the Knicks rolling again as everybody comes back, folks, they are going to shoot up the Eastern Conference standings. They're at 33 wins. I think the Knicks have a chance to maybe, folks, ready? You think I'm crazy? They could get all the way to 2. It is not out of the question.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
Like the Minnesota Wild were down by 2 goals today. They were down by 3 goals, actually, today at one point. And they came back and won. Like teams like, the Edmonton Oilers and the Coyote game went back and forth. The NHL really, you could argue, really is the best sport for in-game betting, where you can pull the trigger on both teams.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
welcome back to NewsWire as we close in on the end of the NBA's regular season and the playoffs. Still some very big games to be had. That would include a couple of big games tonight, including the Miami Heat playing without Jimmy Butler, taking on the Sacramento Kings out west. Also, the Toronto Raptors sort of going through it this year against a team headed for the playoffs in the Indiana Pacers. Our very own Ben Stevens has a preview of both games in the NBA.
Craig, just a few days after the NBA's All-Star break, we go around the association to begin a new week. A lighter slate on this Monday evening, but we start in Sacramento, where one of the stories over the weekend was a dust-up between Miami and New Orleans. Because of that, 5 players suspended, 3 for Miami, 2 on New Orleans, including Jimmy Butler, who is suspended for a game by the NBA. I do not expect to see Jimmy tonight out in Sacktown in California's capital. Because of that, a 7.5-point spread in favor of Domantas Sabonis and the Sacramento Kings. Firmly in that play-in tournament conversation in the Western Conference standings as we are in this home stretch of the NBA season in 2023-24. Sacramento as a favorite this year, 17, 18, and 1 against the number. Miami as an underdog, 12 and 13 against the spread. But in this game for Miami, they will be a little bit shorthanded in Sacramento tonight. Next up, Craig, the Indiana Pacers, who've won both of their games, including last night, snapping a 7-game win streak for the Dallas Mavericks following the All-Star break. A 6.5-point spread in favor of Indiana at home tonight. The Pacers will host the Toronto Raptors and Scotty Barnes. 6.5-point number again. And Craig, anytime you see a Pacers NBA game, your first eye should really go to the total. The over-under tonight, 246. Last night against Dallas that I mentioned, Indiana winning by 20+, snapping that 7-game win streak for the Mavericks. The total was 251, despite Indiana scoring 133 points, still stayed under. In fact, the Pacers have been under in 5 of their last 6 games, and covering numbers, which Indiana has done in each of its 2 wins following the All-Star break, is what the Pacers are really good at. 4th best cover team around the association, 31, 25, and 3 against the spread so far this season. Meanwhile, Toronto has been an underdog quite often, 17, 18, and 1 ATS as a dog this year. Of course, it will be another reunion for Pascal Siakam, the new Pacer, against his former team, the Toronto Raptors. So that's where the NBA stands on this Monday night, Craig. Into the home stretch, each and every result adds a little bit of significance to your record and your standings in your conference.
All right, thanks very much, Ben. We'll check back with Ben tomorrow on the slate of the NBA once again. Now let's check into our studios in Manhattan. Mike Mazzio is with us from Legal Sports Report to go over the latest in sports betting here. And Mike, thanks for coming in a little bit later on the show today. Really appreciate you making some time for us. How was your weekend?
Pretty good, Craig. Everything's well. Just sports season continues to roll, and we're following all the sports betting stuff for Legal Sports Report, including that pretty good SNL skit. Maybe not good for the industry, but pretty hilarious, and hopefully everybody kind of takes from it what they should here so we can protect this industry.
Yeah, we're a tough scene, as I would say from that. I did see that. Very funny. Okay, so let's get started here, and I mentioned this earlier in the show. One of the signature events for sports bettors around the United States for many years. In fact, it's the kind of thing that people, back when sports betting was illegal, used to travel to Vegas for the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. Now, people in Ohio, come NCAA tournament time, I have a feeling, Mike, are going to wake up for the tournament. They're going to go on their sports betting app, and they're going to want to bet on player props. And if they're not watching shows like ours, they're not going to know that they can't do it in Ohio. So that is the hammer down on the ruling there. Why do you think this came to pass?
Yeah, Craig, I think this just stems from the fact that if you go back to when Ohio sports betting opened about a year ago, Anthony Grant on Dayton, I think his team suffered a heartbreaking loss, and his players were threatened on social media, I believe, the way that he put it. He was very frustrated, came out, had a really long answer to a question about this, and just said, our fans need to be smarter. If you care about these kids, you shouldn't be doing this stuff. And I think Ohio State was also vocal about it as well. So you have big universities in the state that have, college athletes, and they're getting social media threats or, harmful text messages from bettors who are upset that their bets aren't hitting. A kid doesn't hit his over-under prop in points or rebounds, and all of a sudden you've got a problem. And so the industry obviously came out and said, we don't like this because they're going to go bet on the black market. the gray market. They're not going to bet at FanDuel and DraftKings, so they'll find another way. And basically what the Ohio Casino Control Commission said is, based on what you told us, you can't really prove that, I guess, so to speak. It wasn't a clear and convincing argument for them. The handle that's taken on these bets was kind of rather minuscule, even though I think it was over 100 million in 2023. I think they took 7.6 billion overall in handle, so that's like 1% or so. And that was kind of their reasoning to why they agreed with the NCAA and even the governor, Mike DeWine. He also came out in support of this college prop ban, and that's it. So, you're not going to be able to bet college props in Ohio, whether people decide to go on this gray-black market. You hope they don't, but that's certainly possible. But again, I think they just felt, for the legal regulated industry as the government, they wanted to protect these student athletes from threats and harm. And they think that this ban is going to, decrease it. Whether that's the case, we'll probably find out in a year. And there's other states, obviously, that have done this. There's states that still have it. So I wouldn't be surprised, obviously, if more states continue to ban it. I mean, this feels like kind of the wave, right? Let's, let them bet on the college teams and the traditional markets of, spread, money line, total, all that kind of stuff. But let's get rid of betting on specific players. So if they don't hit, hopefully they aren't subject to these threats potentially they're receiving and their social media DMs on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and all that from bettors who are upset that their bets don't hit. I mean, that's unacceptable no matter where you are, whether you're pro or college. That's unacceptable.
Yep. Well, we have a ban on props in Ohio. And what's been interesting is around the country, there's been a attempted ban on the daily fantasy pick'em operators, which makes this story very peculiar to me, Mike. PrizePicks partnering with the Dallas Stars. Now, again, the sports betting in Texas is illegal, but the minute it becomes legal is the minute they're going to go after these DFS operators and say, you're not paying the tax, we are, you got to go. So I guess for the short term, this works, right, for the Dallas Stars, but there are even some states that are fighting the pick'em operators without legal sports betting. So I just wonder what this means for the future in that state in particular.
Yeah, so last week I talked to the Stars president and CEO, and basically what he said was it was not only vetted by the Stars lawyers, it was vetted by the NHL lawyer as well. It took several months before they could get comfortable with it, but Brad Albert said, the Stars, myself, we're all comfortable with this, so it's going to go ahead. Like you said, Craig, sports betting and daily fantasy sports currently unregulated in Texas. They tried to move sports betting legislation last session, passed through the House for the first time ever, which was a great step, but certainly met quick demise in the Senate, led by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who is very outspoken about the fact that he is anti-gambling. I asked Alberts about that. What can change in 2025 if Patrick's still in office? And he basically said that's the billion-dollar question because while he didn't want to speak for Patrick, he basically just said he made his opinion known by not moving this thing. That kind of said it all for him. So, yeah, I think it's a tough sell, on sports betting in Texas right now, given the political climate. They've got to change the legislature. The legislature seems to have no reason to do this. We've seen, obviously, there's a casino issue in the state where Mark Cuban and Las Vegas Sands, right, selling a majority ownership stake in the Mavericks to try to facilitate that. That's something where, legislation didn't move, even as far as sports betting on the casino resort issue and whether you'd be able to bet casino-style games in Texas. So right now you've got an unregulated market. You've got PrizePicks, which has been in other southern states that also do not have those regulations yet. We'll see, like you said, Craig, given what happened in New York with the $15 million fine, Florida, getting out of the market, facing pressure from the regulator in the state. So, yeah, right now this is a good partnership, seems like, for both sides. PrizePicks be able to put its logo on the dasher boards, right? The digital advertising you see in NHL games. They'll have some commercial spots, I think, during the Dallas Stars broadcast. The Stars are a really successful team trying to hunt for a Stanley Cup this year. So, yeah, it seems like they'll get some good advertising out of it. But like you said, long term, where does it go? That's a question that'll be answered down the line.
Yeah, and especially in that state, again, if sports betting does become legal in Texas in the next year or two or three, this contract could end up being null and void. But again, for the time being, looks like a really good deal for both sides. Okay, so this is a really intriguing story, I would say, with sports betting not being legal in California and no progress being had as far as getting it legal. FanDuel, Mike, tell us more about this. Talking to the tribes in California, almost seemingly giving up on the idea that they can't get this done without a partnership here. And so I wonder, will the tribes get together with FanDuel? Maybe FanDuel becomes exclusive operator in Cal. I mean, I'm just making it up. I'm just guessing here, but I found this story fascinating.
Yeah, I agree, Craig. And it comes down to, FanDuel a year ago in San Diego, a couple of the tribes said, we invited FanDuel DraftKings to speak at our conference, kind of take the hit, so to speak. And last year they didn't seem to want to. FanDuel said it had a scheduling conflict. So for this to come a year later after 2024, nothing's really going to happen. I think speaks volumes about what FanDuel's trying to do. They've hired 3 tribal executives with experience, another key hire today, really significant hire. So, yeah, they seem to want to move this not only in California, Craig, but maybe in other states, like you said. Maybe it's Florida, right? How do we get in business with Hard Rock, given they have the monopoly? Can we find a pathway there? Can we do anything in Oklahoma? Texas, tribes aren't maybe as powerful in Texas, but another state they obviously want to open the marketplace up to. So this is a really good step, for both sides, I think, given the animosity after the Prop 27 fight and how bad relations were. So for FanDuel to try to make amends, and as Christian Janeski said, this is just one step in trying to earn trust. I think you really have to respect what FanDuel's doing here in terms of at least trying to make amends, take the next step, not repeat the past failures. And whether it's California or these other states, right, that they're trying to get done or trying to find a pathway into Florida, all these key tribal hires, whether they're from California or, the National Indian Gaming Association, this is all really significant stuff. And so credit to Christian Janeski for getting up there, taking the hit, so to speak. I think the ribbing he got was a little more good-natured than maybe it would have been last year when tensions were really high. Mm-hmm. But, you hope that the tribes, the commercial operators, learn their lesson, not only FanDuel, but potentially other operators. Like you said, maybe FanDuel does try to want an exclusive in California. That's why they're getting out ahead of this thing. That's all speculation at this point, but, you can connect the dots there. Potentially that is something that they decide to look at. So, we'll see if DraftKings, Caesars, BetMGM, all the other operators, Caesars has been involved with the California tribe, certainly. We'll see what they do as well. But again, a good step to mending relations. Whether this means 2026 is possible or 2028, 2030, we'll see. But yeah, good step in the right direction, Craig, as these two sides look to try to find common ground. Seems like things are going to have to go through the tribes. They are the power brokers in the state, so they're going to kind of figure out how things go. But whether it's B2B or potentially an actual operator with your brand out there, we'll see. But again, good step in the right direction for both sides here.
Yeah, it does seem like FanDuel sort of realizing they're going to have to coalesce in some way and coexist with the tribes. And in order to have any kind of sports betting going on in California, it seems like the tribes do run it there, just as you mentioned, like they do here in Florida as well. But as you said, first step taken. And again, lots of speculation on you and I, but we do know the facts that at least FanDuel did step up and speak. Okay, Mike, great to have you here on NewsWire. Thanks again for coming into the studio. We'll talk again next week.
Thanks, Craig. Have a great week.
All right, we'll be back to wrap it all up. Can kickoffs change again in the NFL? Are we going to a rule change once more? Play next.
A great big that can block shots, a team that can play defense, and seniors that can put the ball in the hole. That's who you bet on. You don't bet on freshmen. You don't bet on teams that don't play defense. There you go.
I mean, you got to run the guy over to call a foul in a tie game in that kind of a spot. That was a bad job by those refs.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
If Tibbs can find a way to get the Knicks rolling again as everybody comes back, folks, they are going to shoot up the Eastern Conference standings. They're at 33 wins. I think the Knicks have a chance to maybe, folks, ready? You think I'm crazy? They could get all the way to 2. It is not out of the question.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
Like the Minnesota Wild were down by 2 goals today. They were down by 3 goals, actually, today at one point. And they came back and won. Like teams like, the Edmonton Oilers and the Coyote game went back and forth. The NHL really, you could argue, really is the best sport for in-game betting, where you can pull the trigger on both teams.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're gonna go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's gonna help me get the job done. There is not gonna be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
The NFL Competition Committee always looking to make the game better and in most times safer for players. And that happened a few years ago in the National Football League, where they essentially made what turned out to be the kickoffs being irrelevant, where kickoffs basically now just don't even happen pretty much in the NFL anymore. I don't know if you watch the NFL, but the kicker kicks it, goes through the end zone, and then they start on the 25, and there's no returns at all. This is what they did to have player safety, but NFL looks like they're going to tweak this a little bit, maybe going with the potential XFL model, which essentially would lead to more kickoff returns. And now how they end up doing this still remains to be seen, but at least this is something that they are discussing, as the competition committee would like to see players take the ball out, maybe not potentially from the end zone, maybe between the end zone and the 5-yard line. That's some possibility, moving the kicker back once again. But not full time. So a really confusing and compelling way to take a look at the season. But naturally, they would like to see more action at the beginning of the game and not have just a complete waste of time. Also, this has to be agreed upon with the players as well. Players and the owners working together just to make sure that the game is still better, still safe. But we could actually see a different method of kickoffs coming to the NFL this season. Wait to see, remains to be seen. All right, that'll do it for our show today. Thanks again to Jalen Thompson of the Kansas City Star for coming on, also Mike Mazzio from Legal Sports Report, and also Gilbert McGregor from Sporting News. To give you an idea as to what we have planned, we'll be right back here on the show tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern for our next edition of NewsWire. We're here throughout the week. And for those of you who are getting ready for the upcoming baseball season and wondering, hey, where is the fantasy programming? Well, every Saturday morning, in case you missed it this past week, we did another show. But every Saturday morning, myself and Davis Maddock have a fantasy baseball preview for you. So make sure you stay tuned on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern for that show. As for everybody else here, thanks to Sam, our producer, and thanks for watching this latest edition of NewsWire. I will see you tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. for our next edition of the show. We've got Pharrell Coast to Coast coming up at 3 o'clock Eastern. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. See ya.